Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first quarter Robo Global in review. So thank you all for being here today. I know it has been quite the start to Q2 2025, and we'll get into that. So again, I'm Zeno Mercer. I lead research here at Robo Global. And before we get started, I just want to cover some housekeeping. So as you'll see on the page right now, you can ask questions in the Q&A. So again, this is meant to be dynamic. Feel free to ask questions about AI, robotics, tariffs, anything that's happening. If it's relevant, I will try to address it. And we will have dedicated time for Q&A at the end. Reactions, so if there is something you want more focus on or you like or want me to keep talking about, again, feel free to interact. There's reaction buttons on the page. There are resources on the side you can download for now or for later, and survey questions that you can answer at the end. And of course, if anyone is here for CE credit, at the end, you'll be able to sign up and get set up for that. So again, I'm Zeno Mercer. I've been with Robo Global more or less since 2018, helping put together the Artificial Intelligence Index THNQ and HTEC Healthcare Innovation Index. And now, we're, after being acquired, we're now part of Robo Global or TMX VettaFi. So getting into that, again, we were the world's first robotics index, launched in 2013. AI launched in 2018. And again, you're here today probably wondering what's happening, both from a market performance standpoint and also just generally maybe what's happening in the state of robotics and AI. How is that impacting what's happening with tariffs and geopolitics, Chinese manufacturing versus US manufacturing? And there's a lot of other components here that are at play. It's a very dynamic and really fast changing situation. So today, we'll be covering Q1 in review, so just looking at subsector level performance and how certain companies and geographies performed during the Q1 across robotics, AI, and healthcare. Some macro commentary. Well, again, as I was saying, a lot's happened since the end of March, so of course it would not make any sense to not be covering that given the market sell-off. And of course, we'll be talking about some individual technologies and things that are kind of a higher level and above individual company level angles. And again, there'll be time for Q&A. So let's start with a little recap. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a bit of a chronological sort of elements of things that happened throughout Q1 2025. So Trump got inaugurated. There was quickly the Stargate announcement, which was a $500 billion investment mandate from a consortium of companies to invest in data centers and AI in the US. That's also been added to by many others. Within a week, however, DeepSeek came out of China as an open source AI model alternative to a lot of the companies that are investing heavily in this, and it brought together kind of fears. We saw a big market sell-off. I think NVIDIA was down massively. A lot of data center and energy plays were down that are tied to that story. And so, there's kind of the question, will open source eat the world, and what is the viable business models for the companies that are producing these models and investing heavily? NVIDIA, GTC. So NVIDIA had a conference a little bit later, and that was a lot of focus around physical automation and AI. Jensen has basically said that, the next multi-trillion-dollar opportunity is in robotics. That is something that we have believed for a very long time, and we're kind of at this tipping point where it's starting to make sense. And again, I will cover that a little bit more in depth. Obviously, throughout the entire quarter, we've had tariff discussions lingering overhead. We have seen the market selling off well before the tariffs were announced this week. And, so that was a driver. We saw a lot of, fear sell-offs, different geographies reacting differently. And, ultimately, we've kind of seen, outside of that, if we look bigger picture, a lot of this is around the fact that we have outsourced a lot of manufacturing in the USA to the rest of the world. And so China has been a dominant factor of that equation for 2 to 3 decades plus. The U.S. now has a tiny percentage of its local economy, and certainly out of the global scale of manufacturing, a very small percentage. I mean, we certainly have dropped the ball there. But we saw China announce a $140 billion mandate investing into humanoids and other robotic form factors. Meanwhile, the U.S. had the National Robotics Strategy Consortium come together at the Capitol to talk about what should we be doing with robotics? Like, what's our plan? If we're going to try to reshore and make America a manufacturing hub again, what does that actually entail? And it's not what manufacturing looked like 50 years ago. It's a modern form of that. A lot more AI, a lot of automation, and training and reskilling. And of course, kind of to top it off, we saw SoftBank talk about, putting in $1 trillion. Now, I don't think they can pull that together, but again, that was a goal to do AI-powered robotics factories in the USA. Last thing I want to talk about on that timeline was the Turing test, because that's relevant. So AI progress has been coming on a lot since ChatGPT was announced in 2020 or released in 2022. And we now have Gemini. So if you haven't tried out the latest free Gemini AI models, they're incredible. In fact, it's free as well, so you don't even have to pay a subscription. Kind of the way AI or Google has been doing their, service for many years with Gmail and Google Calendar. So again, this market is evolving quickly, and the reason I brought up the Turing test is because AI has kind of passed through this threshold where the classical definition of the Turing test, whether a human can tell it's AI or not, they did a test that was like a 5-minute conversation along a lot of different subject areas. It officially has been breached based on the classical paradigm definition of the Turing test. Now, we're starting to see this appear also in different modalities, voice, video, and this is a game changer. I mean, AI can now do a lot of things, and one of those areas that we're really excited about is its impact in robotics and the ability to help train and operate robots in fleets in an increasingly growing number of tasks. Now, on the themes, we're obviously seeing those AI and robotics exceeding expectations. People who have been bearish on the impact of humanoids and other robots, understanding skills like manipulating highly dexterous things with hands, they're getting blown away by this latest technology coming through. So again, there's a lot happening. We also saw kind of a tale of two cities where we started to see PMI and growth after 18 months of contraction on PMI declining. That was climbing in the US in the first month, and now it slowed down, and now we're on a decline. And we just saw jobs numbers, unemployment rate is climbing, and we are seeing layoffs. In fact, we've actually seen a bunch of plants, like production plants, like cars and things, just reactively shut down since the tariff were announced in the last 24 hours, which is kind of the opposite intent, I think, of where we're, the bigger goal is. So I see some questions coming in, so I'll get to them. But so kind of want to get to this point here of where we're at from society to kind of lay the framework. And again, the market is the market. We are seeing a sell-off. So just kind of think of like, okay, what's the point of all of this? Like, where are we heading? So if we go back to 2020 when COVID hit, obviously there was a big healthcare boom. But we also saw was this like world where we're like, oh yeah, we can do everything online. We can do video calls. It kind of changed. There was a permanent change that came out of that. And sure, there's been a mandate to go back in the 4 or 5 days a week for certain offices, but like we kind of realized there's a lot of things we can do online. And there was a big enterprise digitalization shift and things like that. Now, with this era, we're kind of a mix of isolationist negotiation with manufacturing, and every country around the world is kind of thinking like, okay, we've all outsourced everything for years, and people have been talking about nearshoring and rearshoring for a while, but this kind of feels like a pivotal moment where, I mean, even Canada, for example, is talking about like, hey, we've got all these raw materials, like, why can't we build more here? And so what we are seeing, and this is anecdotally and by actual investment mandates from companies that are in Japan that are thinking about doing more in the USA and beyond, that there is a lot of investment in robotics and AI, because this is not going to be, again, the same factories of the past. In fact, we have dark factories appearing, and someone has asked a question about jobs, and so this is relevant. It won't be the same number of jobs that are being outsourced to Vietnam or China or Indonesia. It's going to be a different makeup if we actually start to build factories in the US. And we probably won't be building as many t-shirts as kind of higher value things such as, solar panels and batteries and other critical components that from a national security perspective make more sense. So again, we believe we're kind of entering this moment where there's kind of this game theory, geopolitics at play, where countries around the world and companies are thinking like, what could I be building now? And maybe the technology has come along far enough that we're going to start to see higher ROI from these investments, and interest rates play into this as well. So to the tariffs. So it comes down to physics and economics, right? Like it doesn't make sense to create and make certain things in the USA. That just doesn't make sense. And from an actual trade standpoint, obviously, I think everyone here knows, or if you don't know, I'll briefly explain the effective tariff rates that were shown by the Trump or the White House administration were effectively just a math model based off the trade deficit. It doesn't make sense that Vietnam, that has $4,000 per GDP per capita, so like in like 3,000 annual household income per capita, would be able to buy as much goods from the U.S. as they sell to us at low cost. But it begs the question of what we can do, and then if we start to build in the U.S., we already have a labor shortage for things that are trying to be built here. So there aren't enough welders. We talk to factories and the companies selling into these all the time. They're saying like, hey, there's been 3 years of massive manufacturing construction happening. We're ready to launch 2 new plants, but we don't have the people. So again, there's a threshold here of we need to start training more people, and that's a big part of this. And of course, there's a lot of robotics and automation investments required. This isn't like a nice to have, which is where it used to be. This is a must have. And so where do we think the tariffs are going to go? Well, sorry, the next slide. I'm not sure my next slide is moving. Oh, okay, there we go. Opposite side of this coin is, manufacturing in America is about to accelerate, and likely in the Prakash comment was in relation to Nike getting hit really hard. So we've already seen consumer discretionary companies that are brands hit very hard so far in this environment, and ultimately, that's because I'll give kind of an analogy here. A lot of U.S. brand companies are wrappers, and that's a term you're going to hear a lot about. Companies just being wrappers of an LLM. They're just like based off another thing that could change. A lot of U.S. based companies are wrappers of factories that have been outsourced across the globe. We don't have that manufacturing capacity. So, and again, that made sense from a physics and economics standpoint of just resource optimization. So we have to figure that out. But again, the concept here is that we will start to see, and there have already been a lot of billion-dollar announcements, and if you add them all up, we're looking at trillions of dollars in global investments into robotics and manufacturing happening right now. So that is happening despite of and caused by the recent tariff and geopolitical angles. So again, if we kind of let's take a step back of like where the markets are reacting. Where are we trending, right? Like COVID, we saw a lot of digitalization. We saw Zoom and a bunch of companies fly up and then, kind of get back to earth. But the long-term trend here is that AI and robotics as a percentage of GDP, what they're able to do, the percentage of physical real-world task of making something, moving something, or manipulating is going to climb rapidly. And we're at this pivot point where it actually was a very small percentage of GDP. People think of this as being huge, but robotics, don't really, they're involved heavily in automotive, and they're involved in some logistics and warehouses, and certainly they're involved in robotic surgery, and we'll talk about that. But again, it's still a sliver of the overall economy, and we see that changing based on the recent advancements in energy, AI, and material science coming together. So where does this lead us? Well, going back to that earlier slide where I mentioned that there was a big presentation at the Capitol a couple of weeks ago, you had Tesla, Optimus, some humanoids, and other companies, especially in warehouse automation there. There's a proposal that we kind of need to have a Manhattan Project of Robot Scale investment mandate and an alignment of policymakers, companies, and beyond to agree on a strategy of how are we going to position ourselves in this future, this AI and robotics landscape that we're in. China's investing heavily, and they're beating us right now. They're getting, they're able to focus and align and build, and they have 5-year projections that are based off this. That was their last 5-year plan was, let's get humanoids in the factories. Let's get dark factories, which means it's lights out, and I mean literally the lights are out because it's fully autonomous. We're not going to be able to economically compete if we don't start to implement some of those technologies. And we've been a bit resistant. In fact, the US has fallen out of the top 10 of robotics utilization for industrial purposes. And that's a big deal because it means we're not taking advantage of the latest technologies to build and be competitive in this environment. So again, if the mandate is, and I've said mandate a lot, but again, it's because like we're kind of seeing this shift, and we are at a shift of industrial independence being a strategic important element. And this is not just the USA again. We're at a turning point. So the A3, so it's an organization that's focused on advancing automation, put together this national robotics strategy concept. And you can see on the page that, there were about 6 points here. This is presented to the US government, but, we don't have a central robotics office. We don't have tax incentives right now to drive this adoption, right? We're talking about tariffs as a stick, but like we need some carrots to drive the implementation of not just reshoring and getting leading Japanese or European companies to invest here, but also local companies to be able to do this. Interest rates will have a plan to this. So if we do see interest rates lower, that should be a positive. We need the government to be a leading adopter, right? We're talking about DOGE, where we're just cutting costs. That needs to be scaling to the next phase of actually implementing robots and AI across different parts of society. We've got some of the highest healthcare spend in the entire world, and outcomes are getting lower. But there's a lot of automation, administrative overhead that we could be streamlining here, and that would actually have a greater impact on the debt load and our ongoing run rate as an economy, while also being able to service the requirements and obligations that we have to Medicare, to Medicaid, and all these different areas that depend on us. So, and I say us as the government. I'm not the government, but you know what I mean. And we also need new industry standards because we are going to be implementing AI and robotics. Like we need to level up what we consider the minimum viable operation. I mean, again, this is a mix of kind of alignment with existing manufacturers and major corporations and the government. So there's a call for the government to not just be waving sticks, but also bring some carrots in the equation. And this would be a very big deal. So this isn't necessarily happening. This is just where we think things should be heading and what, kind of a roadmap of how they get there. Now, to recap the market backdrop. So summarizing that, Trump 2.0 policy is favoring reshoring and global sovereign supply chain independence and resilience. Now, we're of course seeing a big sell-off and confusion, and a lot of companies that are actually going to be a part of this equation are selling off the most. You've got, for example, again, Japanese companies like THNQ that are, falling off a cliff right now, even though they've already invested a lot in the United States. And let's be like real, like these effective tariff rates are probably not going to hold for long. Now, again, I'm not a tariff expert, but it doesn't, these numbers are kind of made up and it's a negotiating tactic. But again, when Trump met with the Prime Minister of Japan earlier this year, they had already talked about, a nat gas agreement for trade to reduce that deficit. But also, again, these companies have already been committed to the U.S. for a long time. So we don't see that punishment, or maybe it's going to be exclusions. But we think, again, that these companies that are sold off are actually the winners here. And so you can see that the valuations, and it's not really long-term outlooks, it's really valuations have been muted here. Again, we've got this labor shortage, so that's got to be matched. And another interesting point that is being overlooked is there's a lot of technological advancements happening. Waymo is expanding in cities. China is getting autonomous vehicles. There's expansion in Japan and other areas too. And so what's happening here? Like we're getting autonomous vehicles. People kept saying, oh, it's 10 years out, 10 years out. And it's starting to happen. And again, we believe the current administration, from a regulatory standpoint, will be a little bit more lenient and allowing companies to start pushing the boundaries here. And ultimately, that's going to change the market landscape. There's about 5 million people that have jobs tied to full-time or part-time delivery or transportation. And we believe that we're going to see a lot of that potentially repositioned from a reskilling standpoint into more factory-type jobs and building and being a part of that equation. So again, there's a lot of changes happening here. So on the performance, so year to date, this apologies in advance. This was the quarterly numbers. We know that these are down in the last 2 days. But again, year to date, we're down 9%. And ultimately, this was a part of kind of mostly the tariffs, because we actually saw overall revisions to the top and bottom line improving. Last 2 years of robotics were pretty tough. People think of AI and robotics as lumped in the same market. They're not. Robotics is tied to industrial manufacturing primarily. There is logistics, there is healthcare and other subsectors, but the primary core area of robotics is tied to that. And a lot of that is still the Chinese market. So I'm going to talk about some companies that are expanding out of that in a second. But so focusing on robotics in specific, we are seeing a global industrial recalibration boom. So I was going to say this: Foxconn, which is known as Han Hai, and ROBO is planning to double the production of iPhones in India. So that's a big part of this kind of thesis right now, is we are seeing a big push away from trying to manufacture in China. There is, and these are going to involve a lot of automation, and Foxconn is clearly a leader in automation. They're also involved in producing NVIDIA's latest Blackwell chips or servers. They're also starting to get involved in EV production. So Foxconn is, if you don't know, is primarily known for, or most known for, being the biggest or the core manufacturer of iPhones for Apple. And so we're seeing them not just diversify geographically, but we're seeing them diversify what they're producing as well. And so this is a company that's down, I think, 18% year to date. And we actually see their opportunities increasing due to their ability to be best in class. I mean, I think we all consider iPhones to be some of the best made products in history and at major scale. And Foxconn is one of those companies that's able to do that. They're producing in Mexico. They're producing in Vietnam. So clearly, there is a disconnect between the opportunity and what the market reaction is right now. We also see, AI at this, I mentioned earlier, this exceeding the robotics capabilities. Now, if we break down what percentage of GDP could be done by robots, it's probably over 50% of GDP. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. That doesn't mean that robots are going to take every job. Just because a robot can do something doesn't mean it's going to do that. But as an example, there are about 400 million people globally that work in some sort of manufacturing capacity. A lot of these things require, fine details, manipulation, assembly that robots don't do right now. We think of robots as being more involved in, moving cars and, assembling big things, and not so much the fine details. And so right now we're getting to the point where robots are starting to get the skills through a mix of simulation and training, where people are wearing gloves and getting cameras, and you can actually train them based on learning and watching and actually getting the tactile feedback. So the AI is actually allowing the analysis of that force feedback and movement and actuation to start training. And then that's simulated in NVIDIA and other GPUs. So AI isn't just for Chat GPT. We're starting to simulate entire environments. Now, what does that mean to the addressable market of robots? It's going to 15x the market in the next 10 years, because it's not just going to improve that core industrial market. It's going to also start entering service economy. I was in Vegas, I think it was 2 weeks ago, for our Exchange conference, and I actually see the names of some of you there that I met there and afterwards. And Henrik Christensen and I, who, he's one of our strategic advisors that was a co-founder of ROBO Global and is one of the top experts that presents the U.S. robotics roadmap to the U.S. government since 2009. We were talking about, where are we heading with kind of real life? Like, when are we going to start getting our Rosie the robot in our home? Like, why are we stuck with the Roomba? And it's getting, the timeline is shrinking, and that's a huge market. In fact, many people are saying that we might potentially shift from car payments to robot payments and leases. And again, that's a new market that hasn't existed before. This doesn't even count drones being able to intercept autonomous vehicles to improve transportation, because we are in a high demand, we want things now economy, on demand. That would also reduce cost. So one thing that's important is that people are worried about the energy and environmental cost of AI, when there's a big offsetting element where autonomous electric vehicles and drones will do the minimum viable robot or path needed to be on this efficiency frontier of getting everything to where it needs to be on that move framework at lower cost and faster speed. That's a big deal. And so let's look at the actual numbers. So year to date and past 12 months, let's look at the right-hand side, the subsector return. We've actually seen food and agriculture. So companies like GEA, we've seen, see some questions, or a lot of questions here. Okay, onshoring and tariffs, got it. We've got food and agriculture doing well. So part of this is due to the fact that with labor shortages and potential issues around being able to fulfill, meat plants and agriculture, like with low cost labor, immigrant labor, that we are starting to see a need for more automation there. Companies like John Deere, John Bean Technologies, things like that, companies like that, they've actually been doing all right here. On the flip side, we've seen semiconductor was a big leader for a couple of years. So computing and AI, we've actually seen a sell-off, and a lot of that is kind of a baby out with the bathwater with DeepSeek, and obviously more recently, kind of the trade war. The reality is, though, that going back to this previous conversation around where AI and robots are heading, is we're actually going to see increased demand from cheaper AI in embedded artificial intelligence systems. So the portfolio is actually angled towards winners in that subsector, not just pure play data center technologies and AI technologies. These are companies that are helping analyze real world environments with sensors and computer vision. So again, we're seeing a sell off here and pain here, but the actual outlook and technology and the forces that are coming together are positive. From a earnings standpoint, so if we look at the latest Q4 earnings season, because we're just now starting to get into the Q1 earnings season, we actually saw a rebound. So we had been coming off a negative year, but we saw 6.6% sales growth and 57% EPS growth. Now, some of these are companies that had gone into the red that are regaining positive EPS. And again, if you look at it, we ended up the year with 93% of the robotics portfolio in positive positive earnings. And this year, it's projected. Now, again, this is subject to change. If the tariffs hold and we actually see a negative year, a downturn, this could go positive while they start to ramp up manufacturing, if that happens. But again, there's 98%, and this is based on FactSet consensus numbers of the portfolio on a weighted average basis. That number is climbing to 98% this year, based on the numbers from a couple of days ago. And that includes tariff fears leading up until that moment. And of course, you can see that that's projected to climb over time because we are at this pivot point of service robots and traditional robots coming together. Again, if you look at from a valuation perspective, we're back despite those positive headwinds coming together. And again, we're going to be below that 3 number now. So we are, if you look at the last couple of days, we've seen a massive sell-off. We are going to be probably around like the 2.8 number. So we are below the long-term historical average from a valuation perspective. And so where we actually focus right now, so we, of course, this robotics landscape is always evolving. So we've actually increased the number of companies in applications and reduced the underlying technologies. And we'll get to a point where we look at the AI strategy and we've actually done the opposite. So again, we have 74 companies that are global. Looking at them more specifically, it's global. We've got only 45% of companies in North America, and that's the reality that we're looking for the best-in-class companies in the world. So this is where they are. 45% North America, 31% APAC, and 24% in Europe. And this is a global SMID. So a lot of these companies are smaller companies. These are not mega cap names that are involved in making, moving, and manipulating stuff in the real world. So this covers, if you look at the bottom left, companies in the core manufacturing and industrial automation space, but also sensing companies that are involved in making sure things coming off the line are defect free and that the line is operating properly. So companies like Keyence, someone asked about, hey, what percentage of these companies have been profitable? And we already kind of answered the percentage, but companies like Keyence, Ko-Young, a lot of these names have been profitable for many, many, many years. They're independent, they're self-sufficient. And I'll actually call out Ko-Young real quick. They're actually one of our best performers year to date and down year over year. But I want to give them a shout out because they actually are more traditionally in wafer inspection for the semiconductor space. And they've actually added, and this is incredible, a neurosurgical robot that just got FDA approved earlier this year. And they're also planning on getting approval and gunning for approval in Japan and in China later this year. And they're a South Korean-based company. So again, these are great companies that are global. That everything is seeing a sell-off, but these companies are adding new products. They're integrating AI in their products, and they're getting approvals and milestones despite what you're hearing on the news, despite everything that's happening. Real quick, I'm checking the question list because I think okay, we have a question. How will tariffs imposed on India and Vietnam impact the growth of Robo? Okay, so one, we have to see if the tariffs, like from a negotiation standpoint, where these end up. Because we don't have any companies in India directly, but of course, as I mentioned, we're seeing companies like Foxconn reshore there. It's hard to say where we end up. I don't think, the tariff numbers don't necessarily make sense. Again, Vietnam cannot offset the deficit. In fact, an interesting point is even if a company had, or a country had a negative tariff, they paid US companies 5%. The way that the math was calculated was based on a trade deficit. So even if they had a negative tariff rate and paid US companies to come there, they would still be in the 10% list or above if they had a deficit. So again, we think that companies like Vietnam and India are too strategically important. We're not going to be able to reshore a lot of the stuff in 2 years' time. So you can start investing in it, and that's already happening, but that's not going to happen in 2 years' time. So I think that we are at, I hope and believe that we are at kind of this like peak fear of like where we're at, and that things will settle. I mean, California is already dissenting and saying, hey, don't include us in this trade war. So I think, there's an aim for some wins. Like maybe they do lower some tariffs where they can. But again, I see it as ultimately a positive for companies because, again, whether they start building more in India or Vietnam or the USA or Mexico and Canada, we're actually seeing companies tied to Canada production falling off a cliff. Look at Celestica. It's been one of the best performers for many years. It's in a free fall right now. And it actually makes no sense because, right now, Canada and US seem to be approaching at least minus the current, the public element of this discourse, they are in a prime position to be key manufacturing partners for North America. So again, there is a disconnect there. So I'm going to move on to Think for now. So AI, what's been happening? Well, let's recap how we got here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but we obviously saw the chip shortage in 2022. That was a key element going back to where a lot of the CHIPS Act was enacted, was to say, hey, we actually depend on APAC way too much as in America or North America, and we don't have, if something were to happen, we would be crippled and kneecapped. And so, of course, we saw generative AI come out with ChatGPT. We've seen enterprise and government adoption starting to take off. It's really not that much yet. And we're starting to see lightweight models appear. So these are open source, potentially lightweight models that can run on your phone. And this kind of goes into whether, if you have a giant cloud data center, if you even need it, if your phone can start to do a lot of the stuff that AI is potentially capable of doing. And that's another element that would transcribe into physical AI, where we see intelligence added to systems, such as robots, drones, microbots, big bots, and all sorts of system-level integration. So AI and physical intelligence isn't just a robot being able to manipulate something. It is how it communicates in real time and ahead of time with the rest of the components there. So that's a big important element, that you're not just controlling an individual motion, and that's a key area of advancement that unlocks a lot of value. We're seeing advancement happen at the systems coordination level, that simulation level. So both of those coming together are a big deal. Now, let's get to the next slide. Okay, so again, that's concept known as hybrid AI. As we start to see more AI embedded into systems across facets of society and different industries, there is also an equal and important related area that is a big part of the body of artificial intelligence. We're looking at monitoring, explainability, and cybersecurity. If we start to depend on things for decision-making, then we need to make sure that it's secure and it's able to be monitored and that it's working properly. So if you think of a body, we have mitochondria, we have cells, and it's all coordinated. We have a nervous system, we have organs that are important for different things. We have communication between each other. Imagine those types of concepts. So again, don't just look at AI as data centers and ChatGPT. if we look at where it's heading, it's going to be a broader landscape of companies. And these are companies that are already providing critical services today, like connectivity, but their role is going to be enhanced and utilized even greater as we evolve. So how is THNQ doing? Well, we were doing great up until February, mid-February. I think we were up 12%, and now we're down maybe 18% since mid-February and the tariff fears happening. A lot of the sell-off was a mix of data center and semiconductor. The Mag 7's down, I think, 22% or more year to date. We only have about a 12% overlap with the Mag 7, so that's not really driving it. But again, overall, it's clear that there's just sentiment and risk off here. But again, if we look at the earnings season, if we look at actually what happened mathematically from the companies that are involved in this portfolio, we actually had one of the best earnings season in THNQ history. So if you look at the earnings growth for Q4, we saw sales up 20%. And again, this is a weighted average basis across the entire portfolio. This isn't just NVIDIA leading the charge. We saw EPS growth of 35% in Q4 and 96% of the portfolio profitable. So again, people think of AI as a lot of these companies, and there are startups, for example, that are being invested in by some of these portfolio companies like Amazon, where it is more of a risky value proposition because, again, we could see open source AI take over, and the value prop of being the ones that are investing heavily in that don't start to make sense as much. We believe, and we've actually shifted the portfolio to being more on the infrastructure side, where we're now 60%. And I'll show that in the next slide. But if you look at the winners of the last 12 months, we have consumer AI actually doing strong. We have cloud providers in a good position, quantum computing doing well. Factory automation, going back to that area being in a struggle, clearly it's not had the best time. And network and security, so these are companies involved in connectivity, cybersecurity, have not been doing as well year to date as well. In fact, that is the worst performer year to date, even after, or perhaps they were one of the stronger areas over the last 2 years. So again, if we look at revisions, and I don't have that on the screen, but revisions across the board, and this was up until a couple days ago, so I haven't seen the latest 2-day changes if there's been a revision. We've seen EPS and revenue forecasts climb as well. So not only did we have 80% of the portfolio beat sales and EPS expectations, we've seen revisions climb upwards. So again, despite the market and valuation climbing and dropping off a cliff, we've actually been in an environment where all the expectations from a weighted average basis have been improving. So there's a disconnect here, and we believe a growing opportunity. So again, this number used to be more like 60-40 or even 55-45. We've been reducing our exposure to companies that are in the crosshairs of where we believe LLMs could be destroying business models. So we actually removed Salesforce late last year because at the end of the day, they are a wrapper of data that is from organizations themselves. And they are expensive, and their goal, and Wall Street is expecting their agent model to be a big driving force. Now, we believe agents will have a big impact, and we know that, and we're using them ourselves. But if you extrapolate that, it's getting easier for everyone to build agents. So if you already have your own data, and at the end of the day, Salesforce is a user interface, and it's backed into a database that they hold, companies are already starting to see that they can do a lot of this themselves. And that's one of the things about AI. It's going to make not only organizations, but individuals empowered to do more with less. And that's kind of why people talk about AI being deflationary, is because you can start to do high value services. And the US economy is very service-based, majority service-based, not manufacturing or physical based. There's a lot of disruption that could be happening in that area. Now, we're not saying we don't want AI to thrive. In fact, I think the opposite is that we believe that AI is going to get so good that it starts to cannibalize a lot of business models. And again, we've been positioning the model to be more on the infrastructure side of the enabling technologies. And that's been a shift over the past 2 years since ChatGPT came out, as we see, because we're looking at the underlying technologies and moats of each company that are in the index. So again, where we're at today, we're primarily North America. So we believe that North America and the companies on that enabling landscape are still primarily North America. Now, that's different from the robotics landscape. So it's also large cap. So this doesn't mean mega cap. This is larger cap. So companies in the $100 billion range, $50 billion range, a lot of great companies that are in that sweet spot of providing a lot of value to the current landscape. So we've got companies like, CyberArk doing machine identity protection, but we also have, we added Tempest AI, which is doing AI for healthcare, and they're working with health systems and providers and research. Let me think of some. I think we have a question about some of the companies in here. One sec. Yeah, I actually want to call out Ambarella, which has been selling off, one of the companies that's been selling off this year, and it reacted with all of semi sell-off. They do computer vision for embedded devices, so cameras, autonomous vehicles, drones, and robots. And it's actually, they actually raised guidance earlier this year and announced new AI products, and they're down, even though ultimately their end markets are expanding rapidly as, let's say, DeepSeek or DeepSeek 5.0, whatever you want to call it. That I'm just making that up. But as we see AI evolve, their value proposition of what you can do with robots will enhance, and the utilization of their products should be growing. So again, we're seeing a landscape shift of where semiconductor is the backbone and kind of the core of why AI is possible. But we're seeing a lot of different companies that are involved. Cloudflare is another example of a company that helps with deliverability. This call is happening partially in part because Cloudflare is making sure that there is secure communications happening. Companies like Qualcomm, chipsets, MediaTek, another connectivity company, they're very important in this value chain of AI. In fact, let's say AI becomes free. There's so many angles of that, and the cost of AI goes down to the cost of the compute and energy itself. What are the companies that win in that scenario? And companies like Cloudflare that are involved in that deliverability, secure interaction between your device or a robot and the cloud, there are companies that are positioned directly in that spotlight. Okay, we have another question. How much overlap is there between THNQ and ROBO? I believe it is about 14 or 15% overlap. So it's less than most indices overlap to the Qs or S&P 500. So there is not that much overlap. I wouldn't say that it's going to decrease over time. I think the overlap between robotics and AI, but we do differentiate between the physical automation world and companies that are focused on atoms and moving atoms, and the companies focused on bits. And this is a company that's focused on managing the bits that are involved in artificial intelligence, from data to connectivity to network and security and beyond. So I see there's some more AI questions. I need to keep moving here. So we're going to cover healthcare. So one of the things that has happened this year is we have a new administration. And one of the concepts of this new administration is make America healthy again. And given that America is the world's largest market and often the most expensive market for healthcare, it makes sense that we bring this up. So at the end of the day, from a core technology standpoint, we're seeing technologies like liquid biopsy. So companies like Guardant Health, Grail, Exact Science with Cologuard, proving their model works. We're seeing their adoption rates climbing. Also, Natera's in that mix, and I'll go to a company spotlight page in a second. But we're seeing liquid biopsy actually start to take off. This used to be a holy grail of being able to detect cancer and potentially other diseases earlier. So non-invasive. So you don't have to get a full biopsy. There's going to be, you will eventually, but we're now making the system more efficient. This is not just for detection of cancers, but also the treatment pathway. And if you have cancer, when do you stop chemotherapy or other precision medicine? We used to be kind of flying blind. Now with liquid biopsy, you're able to actually know when to stop. And they've proven that leads to better outcomes, less side effects, less cost to the healthcare system. Now that's an important point because, again, the US has some of the highest spend per capita and some of the lower outcomes per capita. And with MAHA, Doge, whatever you want to call it, there's a push to being more efficient here. And part of the HTEC healthcare technology innovation thesis is finding those companies that are leading the charge to paving the way for better healthcare outcomes, whether they're back-end lab process automation or the forefront with surgical robots. Again, this make, move, manipulate framework also applies to healthcare across the macro scale and the nano scale, even inside your body with stents and cardiovascular. At the end of the day, people are dying, and the healthcare system costs a lot due to obesity. We have dialysis is very expensive, and that's one of the things covered by Medicare, Medicaid, that stands out on its own path. But we also see M&A potentially coming back up with reduced, and right now M&A has not been that high. We've seen Google acquire Wiz and a couple other big acquisitions, but at the end of the day, M&A might start to climb up with this with the new administration. So healthcare, we saw a big spike in HTEC. In fact, it was one of the biggest years ever for I think strategy was in 2020, where we saw a lot of the companies constituents primed for being the key value add contributors to lab process automation and diagnostics and helping solve healthcare in 2020. This includes like automation at hospitals too. And so more recently, we've actually seen valuations sustained below pre-COVID levels, which is very interesting that, there is, despite the need for utilization of these technologies to have higher ROI of our spend as individuals and a government. So these are companies, again, that will help prevent and detect cancers earlier, to help reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, and a lot of other different elements. We should be spending more on that and less on administrative spend. There shouldn't be as many middlemen getting money in the picture between us as individuals and our healthcare. At the end of the day, we're getting to a world where Bill Gates mentioned that in 10 years, we might not go directly to doctors. It might be AI directing us to the next best step of diagnostics. And that's including wearables, and Apple's getting into that. That's including, MRI machines, liquid biopsy. So the tech stack of the future for healthcare is more direct, like human to technology interaction at a lower cost. And, people talk about how much we spend. Well, if we actually started using these preventative diagnostic measures, our healthcare spends would go down because we would be detecting diseases and cancers earlier. We'd be able to understand cardiovascular risk earlier, and there'd be less impact and utilization of the more expensive interventions that happen down the line. So again, when we're thinking about our portfolio construction and where we want to be angling in HTEC, it is those companies that provide value down in that ecosystem. Now, we're primarily in medical instruments. There's also a heavy core in diagnostics. Precision medicine is another big angle. So you need to be able to detect and then cure these diseases. And then, of course, there's process automation and robotics. And robotics is a very interesting element of healthcare. In fact, one of the biggest robotics companies in the entire world is about $200 billion, $180 billion market cap company, Intuitive Surgical. And chances are, if you have a pre-planned elective general surgery, it'll be, you might have Intuitive Surgical helping do it with less, you're not going to have like full open body, like it comes in through ports. It's a lot more efficient, safe, and leading surgeons are using it. And they came out with their Da Vinci 5 in the last year, which provides better outcomes. We also have, and there's potential for expansion into more cardiovascular interventions as well. So they're expanding the indications they can go after. At the end of the day, though, I think what's important to realize is that, healthcare is very complex. I want to call out in precision medicine, a company called Roche. They actually announced a new, and this is kind of something I think everyone should pay attention to. There's a new critical cardiovascular risk factor that has been identified that is more higher impact than cholesterol numbers and what your annual blood work would show. It's called LPA. And it's more recently being able to be diagnosed and detected at the molecular level. So like actually getting the scientific raw amount of molecules. So Roche has come out with that test. And there's now tests going that can actually reduce LPA. So kind of talking about like intervention or detection and intervention, companies like Roche are at the forefront of that. So if you go to a cardiologist and your numbers look good, or a primary care physician, LPA is actually genetic. So it doesn't matter if your numbers look good. This is a risk factor that can happen behind the scenes. And since cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death worldwide, it's probably a good idea to talk about. And I'm trying not to give healthcare advice or scare you. I'm just saying, like, there are things that have been around for a long time that we're now able to solve because of these companies that are coming up with detection and cure processes. Okay, so I'm leaving time for Q&A now. So I have, okay, got a bunch of good questions here. Okay, a question from Jacob. Do we honestly think onshoring and all this will take place in the next 1 to 4 years before a new administration comes in and implements their own policies? The turnaround time on seeing the benefits for this feels like it will take far too long. The answer is manufacturing construction has been at a record high 200 billion run rate for the last several years. And that is over 3 to 5x the historical average. And we've not actually seen the implementation. So we actually have a lot of the bare bones areas ready to go. The previous administration was actually implementing policies on more of the carrot side with the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act to bring energy and chip infrastructure end to end back in the USA. So I would say that, yes, I would say even these current tariff situation is going to evolve. This is, we're day 2 from the announcement. So I would even say that that's going to be an evolution. Do we think? So I think we're going to focus more on those core enabling technologies that we need in the US to be resilient from a supply chain perspective, not reshoring T-shirts. And if that happens, it'll probably be more nearshoring to neighbors like Mexico and Canada. The turnaround time for benefits to this will take too long. Yes, it'll take a while to ramp up production. In fact, there are a lot of people I know that manufacture multiple generations of speakers, for example, in the USA, that are now looking at potentially being forced to shift production because there are components that they use that are now getting hit by like 25% to 50% tariffs that haven't been manufactured in the US in over 20 to 30 years. And so that is now nuking profitability to the point where they might be cash flow negative. So again, there's still some policy elements where just reducing, in fact, there actually aren't even tariffs to be reduced in a lot of cases. The effective tariff rate is a lot less, like by a magnitude of 10x than what was listed. Again, that was just a trade deficit. So again, bigger picture is we are seeing global rebase of where manufacturing is occurring. So again, that is India, that is Vietnam, that is Mexico, that is all over the world. In the US, it's going to look different. It isn't going to be, someone asked about jobs. How is AI not going to destroy the labor force due to automation and job cuts? Is it imminent to end up in a UBI situation for those unemployed? Well, we already do have a form of UBI for people who are unemployed. We have Medicare, Medicaid. We already have safeguards. Now, if we actually start to improve productivity per capita to a point where we use more robots and we can do more with less, and energy starts to become in a period of an abundance, we might get to a point where we do need to work less, where we do have 4-day work weeks or less, where we can go from, and again, this is ripping off my presentation at Exchange from a couple of weeks ago, but AI is enabling tools to become intelligent partners. And what this means is we're going to be able to go as individuals from endless to-do list to bucket list, because you're going to have more resource output and more bang for your buck. Like, there is no way that we do not have deflationary pressure for the price of services, goods, and other things coming down the line eventually. Now, again, to your point about the question around jobs, this could lead to less jobs. In fact, that's probably the case for now. We're seeing layoffs at mega cap companies, and we're seeing, well, we will need more jobs in manufacturing if that starts to happen. And so the question is, do we get to a world where we have UBI? Well, what is that? Is that the government fulfilling everything, transportation to production to energy? Does that mean that all those things are free at that point because they're running autonomously with nuclear and solar and other form factors coming together? I mean, that would actually, for the data center investment case and the energy tied to it, that'd be a boon for that, because AI wouldn't just be tied to data centers at that point. It would be tied to full environmental or economical automation. But that's a really good philosophical question, because this is happening. China is going full force on automating as much as possible. They plan to enlist hundreds of thousands of humanoid robots and other form factors. Let's be clear, it's not just humanoids. And there is a question about humanoids. Going back to what percentage of GDP could be done by robotics, it's a lot. And what percentage would be done by humanoids is less, because humanoids aren't going to be doing rapid warehouse flow between when you drop in packets full of goods into a Walmart warehouse. You're not going to have a human doing that manually. In fact, a human hasn't been doing that manually for years. So why would a humanoid do that? So there's advanced automation techniques and companies that are involved in that. Companies like Symbotic, which are partnered with Walmart. But again, there's also the concept that I think I'm coining, or I have coined, where it's the minimum viable robot, where what is the least amount of resources used from a raw product, like a CapEx standpoint, and an ongoing OpEx and energy standpoint to solve for any specific system or problem set in the physical world. So again, that could be having a mixture of robots at your home, such as a humanoid that costs 20K to 30K, alongside a drone that can carry something faster if you're outside or inside, taking care of tasks that you don't get around to. So again, think about this call right now. Back in the day, people are scared about the internet. People are scared about electricity. There's always been a fear of like, okay, how do we adapt as a species or society to these incoming technologies? But, we're all able to talk. I mean, I'm thousands of miles away from many of you. And we've adapted. In fact, it's enabling people around the world, not just the US, not just first world companies or countries, to do more, to have higher, better access to healthcare. We're getting surgical robots that can be remotely operated in parts of the world where people don't have high quality surgeons. So we're really seeing a global leveling up. And I would say the fear about like low and middle class being hit hardest, in fact, I think they're all going to be raised by the ability to have low cost, like the best in class healthcare, the best in class defense, personal AI assistance. I mean, it's going to be truly amazing. And I'm definitely more on the optimistic camp of where this will impact individuals. Now, companies, there's going to be Kodak moments. Like we're going to see companies that are going to be completely business model erased because AI can do what they can do better, faster, potentially free for individuals. So again, this, if you think about portfolio and what's happening in the world, we're seeing tariffs. It's a lot of noise. I definitely encourage thinking through the bigger picture of where we're heading. What happens when AI starts proofing itself and we run into the snake eating itself scenario? Okay, we're getting a little bit more philosophical again, but also technical. We already have people using AI to code AI and develop things. So again, a lot of this will be a who watches the watchman scenario. Like how do we build observability technologies to make sure that the inputs, outputs, biases, simulations make sense for whatever task is at hand? And again, it's going to be a mixture of models as well, a mixture of systems. And so I would say like kind of the bigger question is like, do we trust AI to monitor itself? No. Do we trust humans to monitor themselves? No. That's why we have governments. That's why we have systems in place. And I believe that those same types of concepts will be applied to the adoption of AI. And so I think, again, that goes back to a lot of the companies that we are, allocating into in the Think Artificial Intelligence Index. They can start to apply and utilize and help be a part of that equation. Observability and reporting is a big part of this. The EU especially is very much, almost to a joke standpoint, like people are like making fun of them, but it's true that, there do need to be safeguards and safe rails here. And again, that's a big component of our evaluation of companies is, do they thrive in diverse regulatory environments? Do they enable the adoption of AI in regulatory diverse environments around the globe? So again, these are all great questions and key components to keep in mind. I'm trying to think of what else I can leave you all with. I have a question about Palantir. Palantir, obviously an AI firm. It's a bit questionable because I think we're entering a world where AI can be used, and again, defense is always something that comes to mind. We do have generally, this will be good for some of you. Some of you will not like this, is that we do have for more or less an ESG policy that's around what AI and robotics companies are being used for. So you'll notice we don't have any autonomous, military drones. We don't have, killer AI bots in our platform, and those are going to start to appear. We're going to see the military be a big adopter of AI and robotics. It already is. But we're more positioned for kind of like the general broader purpose, and I don't think that should be discounted. That is a huge opportunity. But I do appreciate that question. I mean, they are doing a lot of work with the military and governments around the world. I guess I'll leave this at this again, that we are moving from a turning point from tools to intelligent partners. That technical capabilities are rising faster, and we will need a form of a Manhattan Project style investment to be able to kind of navigate and maintain, global dominance. There could be permanent changes from the way countries are shifting away who they partner with. So again, if we're talking about these tariffs, we need to position that to be more carrots and in negotiation. But again, like, we'll see where this settles. It's too early to kind of land on exactly where we head with that. It's still a question mark. So again, I want to thank you all for being here. I know you're probably all getting a lot of questions from clients, questions yourselves. Hopefully there were some angles here that were helpful for you. And again, if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to me if something comes up. Thank you all for being here for our Q1 call. Thank you for the thumbs up. And everyone, I hope you have a great couple weeks until I see you again. Thank you.